1991. Cassette tapes and Walkmans, the rise of grunge music. The first Gulf War was dominating the news, and the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was on TV screens everywhere. Life in many communities felt simple and safe. Kids would ride their bikes around the entire neighborhood even after it was dark. Families walked down the street without worry, but that sense of security was shattered in Austin, Texas, when 4 teenage girls were found brutally murdered inside a frozen yogurt shop. It's been 30 years, and this case is still unsolved. Their killer or killers are still walking free today. Were the girls killed by someone they knew, someone who specifically targeted them? Was it the work of a serial killer roaming the area? Or were their killers already caught and convicted, only to be released, and are still walking free to this very day? Thank you so much for joining me for this week's investigation. If you're not already yet, please make sure that you're subscribed on YouTube and following the show on Spotify and Apple. I've been racking my brain all week trying to figure out what I think most likely happened in this case. This is a case that's absolutely going to stick with you long after you've heard it. And I really hope that I'm able to give this case the coverage that it deserves, because I truly believe that this case could be solved, and could be solved really, really soon. So with that being said, this is the Unsolved Yogurt Shop Murders. My name is Brianna, and I'm hot on the case. It started with a frozen yogurt shop and 2 17-year-old best friends. Eliza Thomas and Jennifer Harbison worked together at this cute little frozen yogurt shop in the strip mall in North Austin. That night, the girls were closing the shop, I can't believe it's yogurt, all by themselves. But shortly before closing, the girls were expecting Jennifer's 15-year-old Sarah and Sarah's best friend, 13-year-old Amy Ayers, to join them at the yogurt shop. The older girls were probably going to try and put them to work, get the younger girls to help them close the shop faster. December 6, 1991 was a Friday, and the 4 girls were actually planning to have a sleepover all together after Eliza and Jennifer closed down the yogurt shop. These 4 girls were best friends. They met through the Future Farmers of America. All 4 of these girls really loved animals, and they bonded through their time in FFA. They were beautiful, smart, driven, passionate young girls. Amy was only in middle school. Jennifer and Sarah were their parents' only children. They were their parents' entire world, and the sisters were extremely, extremely close. Eliza was also extremely close with her only sibling, her younger sister, 13-year-old Sonora. The girls were just supposed to finish up their shift at their part-time job and then go have a sleepover. But there would not be a sleepover that night. Less than 1 hour after the yogurt shop closed, a police officer that was patrolling the area saw some smoke coming from the strip mall. And that's when he discovered that the yogurt shop was engulfed in flames. Within 30 minutes, over 50 firefighters were at the scene.
At 11:47, one of our patrol officers called in to dispatch smoke coming out from, I can't believe it's yogurt. Fire department got here shortly thereafter.
And as they were putting out the fire, they discovered, to their shock and horror, a gruesome scene. A quadruple murder. 4 dead bodies. 4 teenage girls.
What we found in the back there was we found 4 victims. We're handling it as a homicide right now because it appears that one of the victims was struck in the head.
Were the victims together, or were they in different parts of the building?
No, I can't. Can't give you that either.
Were they bound in any way?
Can't give you that.
Was there any sign of forced entry to the building?
Can't give you that.
What can you give?
Just what I gave you. It's still very early in the investigation, okay?
Money was taken from the cash register, so right away it looked like this possibly could have been an armed robbery gone wrong. Investigators began to piece together what happened during that closing shift at a frozen yogurt shop, and they did that through witnesses. There were, as you can imagine on a Friday night, quite a few customers at the yogurt shop that evening. Between 9:30 and 10 p.m., so about an hour or so before the murders, Daryl Croft and a few of his friends went into the yogurt shop. Daryl was former military police, and at the time he owned his own security company, so the car that Daryl drove had lights on the top of it that could have been mistaken as a police car. There was a man inside the yogurt shop that a lot of witnesses remember seeing. And this man looked really on edge when this cop car drove by and pulled up to the shop. This man appeared to be at the yogurt shop alone, and he began telling all the people in line to go ahead of him in line. And when Daryl entered the shop, this man approached him and asked him if he was a cop, as he was sort of motioning towards his car. Daryl told him that he was not a cop, and then this man told Daryl to go ahead of him in line. Daryl, who was former military police, is sensing that something is off here. There's something wrong with this guy. So he declines this man's offer to let him jump the line so he can watch what this guy does next. Daryl watched this man approach the counter and order a single can of Coke. And then this man walked behind the counter to the back of the store. When it was Daryl's turn to order, he asked the employee, which was Eliza, where that man went. And she said that he needed to use the bathroom, so she let him, and the bathroom was in the back of the store. Now, this is very important, that this man went into the back of the store. And the red flags for Daryl are really going off at this point. It's pretty late at night on a Friday night, and here's this single guy in this frozen yogurt shop alone. He doesn't appear to be with anyone else. He's trying to get everyone to go ahead of him in line, like he's trying to be the last guy in the shop right before it closes. He gets stressed out when he thinks there's a cop in the store, and all he orders is a single can of Coke in a frozen yogurt shop at 10 p.m. So Daryl, after ordering his own frozen yogurt, he hangs out for a while. He wants to wait for this guy to return from the bathroom. He wants to see what he does next, if he plans on leaving. But unfortunately, Daryl couldn't wait around any longer. He had to go, and he left without seeing this man return from the bathroom. Not long later, a couple entered the yogurt shop, and the only patrons in the shop at this point were two men sitting together in a booth. These men were wearing large, oversized coats. They seemed to be on edge and agitated and were whispering to each other and were acting just really strange overall. And the woman actually got like such bad vibes that she wanted to leave the yogurt shop as soon as possible because these two guys in the booth were creeping her out that much. So the couple left the yogurt shop around 10:45 p.m., leaving the only customers in the store with Eliza and Jennifer, just these two men sitting in this booth. Sarah and Amy were hanging out at the North Cross Mall about 2 blocks away from the yogurt shop that evening, and then around 11 p.m. they arrived at the yogurt shop so they could help the older girls close the shop faster so they could all get to their sleepover as soon as possible. After the younger girls arrived, Jennifer and Eliza went to lock the door and they changed the sign to closed. When the fire was put out about an hour after this, the key to the front door was still in the door. And this was the shop's policy, to lock the door at 11 p.m. so no new customers could come in. And then the closers could close up the shop, letting any lingering customers to finish up their yogurt. And they would keep the key in the front door so when those lingering customers finished up, that they could let them out the locked door as fast as possible. They could let them out easier because the key was already in the door. So logically, it would make sense to believe that those two men that were still sitting in the booth at 10:45 were still there at 11 when Sarah and Amy arrived at the yogurt shop and Jennifer and Eliza locked the door. And then very quickly after that, it seemed like things took a turn. Around 11 p.m., the no sale button on the cash register was pushed. So the register was opened, but no sale was made. And what happened next likely only took about 25-30 minutes. Some point between 11 and midnight, the 4 girls were forced into the back of the store in this like back storage area where they were stripped of all their clothes, completely naked. Their hands were tied behind their back by their own underwear, and then their clothes were used to gag them. Tragically, there is evidence that the two younger girls, 15-year-old Sarah and 13-year-old Amy, were raped. And then the four girls were each forced to their knees, and one by one were each shot in the back of the head with a .22 caliber firearm. The first shot did not kill Amy Ayres, so she was shot a second time with a .38 caliber firearm. So 2 guns suggest that there were at least 2 killers. The girls' bodies were stacked on top of each other in the storage room. Amy's body was about 10 feet away in the bathroom. It's been theorized that maybe she was still alive and she rolled off the stack of her best friend's bodies and then tried to crawl away for help. The killers then poured some lighter fluid on some styrofoam cups. They set those styrofoam cups on fire and then threw them into the storage room to start this big fire, likely hoping that the fire would destroy any and all evidence. And then the killer or killers fled out the back door and to this day have not been caught. There was a bank bag under the register that had some cash in it that was left untouched, but there was a small amount of money that was stolen from the cash register. So the theory that this was an armed robbery gone wrong seemed possible. But most robbers aren't killers. And typically when you have an armed robbery take a turn and then become a murder, the victims are not teenage girls. An armed robbery usually becomes a murder because the robbers lose control, and teenage girls are easy to control. So what was the motive? Were these girls targeted? Was this a crime of opportunity? Was this a sexually motivated crime? Were these robbers that had been casing the place and thought there were just 2 girls and then were shocked to see that there were actually 4 girls in the back of the shop at that time? And as you can imagine, this senseless tragedy really devastated their 3 families. These girls were so young, so full of life and promise, and had these bright futures ahead of them, and that was all taken away in such a senseless, sudden, brutal way. It was only a few weeks before Christmas, and these families probably already had their daughters' Christmas gifts bought and wrapped and hidden away. There was one mother who spent that Christmas after losing both of her daughters, all of her children. I can't even imagine the pain and the grief. The entire community was shaken to its core. And right away, there was a lot of media attention on this case, and there was a lot of pressure on the police to solve this case as soon as possible. But unfortunately, there were a lot of struggles right from the get-go. And I mean, literally, from the very second of this case. The firefighters that were called to put out a fire of a frozen yogurt shop at midnight never expected to stumble upon a murder scene. And sadly, that means pretty much the entire scene was compromised and contaminated. It's a mix of the fire and then all the water that was used to put out the fire. It just completely wiped away any DNA or fingerprints that you could hope to find. Some of the firefighters actually said in hindsight that they might have actually been stepping on the girls' bodies and didn't even know it while they were trying to put out the fire because it was so dark. The city of Austin, Texas in the early 1990s was nothing like the city it is today. Murder was a lot less common, and sadly that means that these investigators just weren't as equipped to solve this case as they should have been. We'll get into a bit of the homicide investigation team on this case in a little bit. There were a few really good and dedicated investigators on this team, like John Jones, who dedicated his entire life to solve this case and even suffers from PTSD to this very day because of it. But there were also some not so great guys investigating this case. But sadly, the facts are the facts, and this case just wasn't handled the way it should have been. Possible evidence was contaminated or just ignored completely and not collected. And allegedly, because right away they just assumed this was an armed robbery gone wrong, they only checked for fingerprints on the cash register. Reportedly, they didn't even bother to check the trash can for any possible evidence, which really sucks, because if you remember that shady guy that ordered that can of Coke only like an hour, 30 minutes before these girls were murdered, it's very possible that he would have thrown that Coke can away in the trash can, and that's evidence. His DNA could have been on it. They apparently didn't check the bathroom for any fingerprints or evidence. And remember, creepy Coke can guy, he went into the bathroom in the back of the store. He could have actually had to go to the bathroom, or he could have asked to go into the bathroom in the back of the store to kind of stake out the place. Because the girls' bodies were found in the back of the store. One of their bodies were found in that very bathroom. The community really tried to come together during this awful time. On December 10th, 4 days after the murders, over 1,500 people came to a joint memorial service for the 4 girls. There was a $25,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. The FBI even helped put together a psychological profile of who they believed the killers could be. The profile states that the murders were most likely committed by more than one person, likely white men in their teens or early 20s. They live in the area. In this group, there was likely one dominant personality that would manipulate and control the other weaker personalities. They urged the public to look out for people that fit this profile, that these people probably temporarily left town after these murders and had an abnormal interest in coverage of this case. But even with all these resources, there was just no trail for the investigators to follow. But on December 14th, only 8 days after the murders, someone was arrested only 2 blocks away from the yogurt shop. He was walking around the North Cross Mall with a .22 caliber handgun tucked into his pants. 16-year-old Maurice Pierce was taken into custody, and he was questioned about this quadruple homicide from the week earlier. Maurice said that that evening he was hanging out with a group of guys: 15-year-old Forrest Wellborn, 16-year-old Robert Springsteen, and 17-year-old Michael Scott. Now, allegedly at first, he was telling the detective questioning him that he had no idea about nothing. But only after the tapes started rolling did Maurice have a different story. Maurice told the investigators that his friend, 15-year-old Forrest Wellborn, borrowed his gun the evening of the yogurt shop murders. Now, this was the same caliber gun that was used in the murders. And then after borrowing this gun, Forrest just kind of disappeared for a while. And when Maurice saw him again that evening, Forrest was sweating and in a panic, and he was saying, "I just did something really bad." These 4 teenage boys, Maurice, Forrest, Robert, and Michael, they were troublemakers. They all lived in the area. People that knew them said that they would hang around at the North Cross Mall to try and pick up chicks. That was the same mall that the 2 younger girls, Sarah and Amy, were at before heading to the yogurt shop. Out of the 4 of them, Maurice was said to be the ringleader amongst these guys, especially when it came to Forrest. Forrest was a follower, and he followed Maurice. The day after these brutal murders happened in Austin, the 4 of them stole an SUV and drove it to San Antonio to go meet up with some girl. And on the way, all 4 of them remember stopping at a gas station so they could buy a newspaper and read an article about the quadruple homicide at the yogurt shop from the day earlier. And the investigators definitely thought that it was extremely unusual that these 4 teenage boys had just stolen an SUV so they could go meet up with some girl would bother to go buy a newspaper, that they were even interested in buying a newspaper at all. The investigators actually wired up Maurice to go talk to Forrest and ask him what he meant by what he said, and he said that he was joking, and honestly overall just seemed like he had no idea what Maurice was talking about it, so nothing came out of that. Forrest also passed a polygraph test, and since there was literally no evidence that linked any 4 of these boys to this quadruple murder, they were dismissed as suspects for now. Detective Hector Polanco was one of the lead detectives on the case, and before 1991 was proud to say he never had a murder case go unsolved. Now, some would say that that probably makes Hector Polanco an incredible detective, and maybe he was. But any reputation that he once had has been tarnished. People said that Detective Polanco always got a confession, and maybe that's because Detective Polanco has been accused of using interrogation tactics that led to numerous false confessions during his career. In unrelated cases, convictions had to be overturned because it was determined that confessions that Hector Polanco got turned out to be coerced confessions. And actually, the yogurt shop murders infamously has had over 50 false confessions, which is just unheard of. I believe over 1,000 people were listed as persons of interest, and there was over 300 people that were listed as suspects in this case, which means that the investigation team has had about 15% of the people that they suspected end up confessing in this case. And then those confessions turned out to be false. The science behind coerced confessions is really hard for people to wrap their heads around. Most people just can't understand why an innocent person would confess to a murder, confess to something that they did not do. There's a lot of reasons why someone might confess to a murder they did not commit. In some cases, they want some sick sort of glory or attention. But in this case, I'm going to tell you about today, certain interrogation tactics can lead to false confessions. In these cases, you'll see a suspect get brought in, and for hours and hours, they will adamantly deny being involved. But the investigators will interrogate them for hours and hours, no break, no sleep, no food. They're yelling in their faces. They're yelling, "You did this." They will lie and tell the suspect that they have evidence that they did it. They have them on camera committing this murder. They have their DNA on the victim. And after hours and hours of denying involvement, one of two things will happen in these cases of false confessions. Either one, the suspect will crack and say that they did it just to make this hostile interrogation stop, even for 1 second. Or through manipulation, the suspect will start to believe that maybe they actually did commit this crime and then just blocked it out of their memory because it was too painful. And then during their confessions, the investigators will have to spoon feed them details of the crime because they don't actually know any details about the crime because they weren't even there. Like, I'll use this as an example. The detective will ask the suspect, "What color shirt was the victim wearing?" And the suspect will say, "Well, I think it was a blue shirt." Then the detective will say something like, "Why are you lying to us? You know it wasn't a blue shirt. What was it really?" And then through trial and error, the suspect will say white, yellow, black until they finally get the right answer. And then the right answer will go in the suspect's official written confession to make it look like they knew the right details the entire time. So like I said, there were over 50 false confessions in this case, and sometimes those suspects were even publicly announced as being the ones responsible, just for it to come out that they didn't do it at all. And after so much of this, eventually, Hector Polanco was removed off the case, and an entirely new set of eyes, a new investigation team was put together and brought in. But unfortunately, this case was really just botched from the very beginning. It really hurts me to say that because I really do believe that this case could and should be solved, but they were just extremely overwhelmed. There were only 6 officers on the original homicide team. And less than 1 year after the murders, there were already over 2,000 leads and hundreds of people listed as possible persons of interest. Everyone in the community, the state, the country had their own theory on what they think happened, from robbery gone wrong to money laundering scheme to satanic cults being the ones that killed the girls. The reward money quadrupled to $100,000, hoping that this would make people talk. And it did. More people started calling in.
Information that will lead to the arrest and conviction of the person that murdered these girls, and we will give you $100,000 for that information.
But all those calls were, "I think I heard this. I might have seen that." And this small investigation team was just completely overwhelmed, and a lot of leads actually went uninvestigated. And sadly, this case just went cold for years. But there was this one pretty interesting lead that I want to tell you guys about. There was a serial killer that targeted young women and teenage girls that was in Austin, Texas around the time of the yogurt shop murders. In 1966, Kenneth McDuff and an accomplice kidnapped and killed 3 California teenagers. He was sentenced to death, but in 1989 was one of 20 former death row inmates and one of 127 convicted killers that was released on parole due to overcrowding. And within days of McDuff's release, he went right back on to killing. And he went on to kill and rape at least 6 women in Texas. On December 29th, 1991, which was only 23 days after the yogurt shop murders, Kenneth McDuff and an accomplice kidnapped Colleen Reed in Austin. They then raped and murdered her. Allegedly, multiple witnesses placed him at the scene of the strip mall at the time of the yogurt shop murders. And when he was eventually caught, a map was found in his car with directions within 3 blocks of the yogurt shop. McDuff was sentenced to death once again, and he was executed in 1998. But reportedly on the day of his execution, he confessed to the yogurt shop murders. But his confession and the details did not align with the actual facts of the case. His DNA did not match, and there was no physical evidence that linked him to the scene. So once again, the case went cold. When the new investigation team was brought on and the detective Paul Johnson began investigating the case in the late 90s, the team looked through every old record, every old lead, every single file on the yogurt shop murders from the original investigation team. And there was one lead that Detective Johnson really wanted to look at again. And that was the 16-year-old boy that was found with the exact same caliber gun that was used in the murders only a few days after and only a few blocks away from where the murders took place. Maurice Pierce and his friends. These boys were now in their 20s. Some of them had moved to new states, gotten married, and started families. They were each brought in again to be interrogated separately. Maurice and Forrest both adamantly denied involvement, just like they did 8 years earlier in 1991. The now 25-year-old Michael Scott was brought in for questioning on September 9th, 1999. And Michael was interrogated for 5 days. Originally, he denied being involved in this terrible quadruple murder, but the detectives told him that him and his friends did do this. They convinced Michael that he blocked out the memories of committing these murders out of his mind because they were just too painful to remember. And you can literally see in his interrogation footage when he starts to crack and believe them. And I'll try and put in as much as I can of the tapes of his and all of their interrogation footage. I'm not 100% sure if they're gonna be copyrighted or not.
We want the truth, and you know what the truth is. You're having trouble with the memories and flashbacks. You know what happened. You're scared to tell us. I don't blame you. It's a horrible thing what you saw in there. But can I tell you what I keep seeing in my head? Tell us what you see in your head. I keep seeing these girls get shot. Right. Tell us what that looks like. Tell us what you see specifically. How they're getting shot and who's shooting them. Come on, Mike, we're doing good. Tell us. Let's do this today. Let's do it. Seeing girls, I remember seeing them down. I remember one girl screaming, terrified. Okay? I don't know if this is real or not, or if this is Michael, it's real. It's okay. You can present it any way you want. It's real. Mike, look at me. You're remembering what happened because you were inside there, right? You're remembering what happened. I don't honestly remember going in for it. If you were in the building, you were in there with me. I don't believe that, Michael. You don't remember going in there. And you know you were in there. Did you shoot any of those girls? No, sir. Then tell us what happened. What are those two boys doing to those girls? Do I live with this the rest of your life? No, I don't. Then get it out right now. They're you over. They're the ones that shot the girls. Do it. What did you see happen?
At some point, Maurice hands you that revolver. What does he say to you?
Either shoot him or you're next.
That's what he said.
Because I didn't want to do it.
Right. Either shoot him or you're next. What do you remember hearing next?
I remember looking at this girl. I cried. I hear Robert saying, do it, do it. I hear the gun go off. I only pulled the trigger once.
And Michael Scott does begin to confess, and he truly believed that he just blocked out the memories of committing 4 murders. There are times in the interrogation that he gets details wrong and he's spoon-fed the right details. At one point, one of the detectives puts a gun to the side of his head. He keeps telling the detective he's unsure if what he's saying is the truth or lies. He asks the detectives if what he's saying actually happened, and they tell him that it did, that he's a killer. On September 15th, 24-year-old Robert Springsteen was brought in and picked up for questioning. He was interrogated for 5 hours. At points, they're yelling in his face. And from the beginning, Robert Springsteen, he's denying, I didn't have anything to do with these murders. I did not do this.
The problem is, we gotta get what is our options. Our options are,
give you any more truth than I've already given. Where do we go from here?
why can't you? Because you're gonna dig yourself into that thing? Well, you're already there. You've already dug the hole. The hole's there.
Oh, then I'm in it. I don't know. That's what I keep telling you guys. I mean, my God, this was 7 years ago.
But this is one of the most significant things that ever happened in your life.
That's what I keep trying to explain to you. If I was there and I partook in this, I would remember these things.
And you do remember these things.
No, I don't. I do not.
Now, you're the coldest guy I've ever talked to in my life. Are you a cold-blooded murderer?
No, sir, I'm not.
I think you are. I think Maurice is absolutely true about you.
Well, then...
You're the coldest guy I've ever talked
to
to.
take.
Pardon me?
Then let's take whatever actions we need to take. If that's what you believe, and that's where you think this case needs to go, then let's go there.
We don't want to go there.
But I'm doing everything I can and have exceeded my limits of helping you guys. Where do we go now?
He tells the investigators that he had an alibi. That night, during the times of the murders, he was seeing a movie. He was seeing the Rocky Horror Picture Show. But the investigators, they lied to him, and they tell him that that movie wasn't even playing that day, which it absolutely was. But they're trying to convince him that his memories aren't correct, that he's lying. And Robert didn't know that the police could lie to him, so he believes them. And he also confesses to assisting in the murder of these 4 girls. He also confesses to raping 13-year-old Amy Ayers.
What did he tell you to do? The test what's going to happen? What did you do? What's wrong? Okay, where? Where did you think you shoot? Wow. Where? And what did you shoot? I shut it down. You already fill up? What now? You're saying yes. What else? What else? Yeah, you do. You're there. Absolutely. You are there. You wasn't there, right? Yes, you know how you say it.
During his verbal confession, a lot of the details he gave were incorrect, so he was spoon-fed the correct details for his written confession. But even in Robert and Michael's confessions, the written confessions, they still got a lot of details wrong about the case. All 4 of these men, Maurice, Forrest, Robert, Michael, were arrested on 4 counts of murder. 2 of them adamantly denied involvement. There was no evidence, DNA, fingerprints that linked any of them to the murders. The real kicker was that Maurice's .22 caliber gun was proven through ballistics to not even be the gun that was used in the murders. His .22 caliber gun was not a match for the murder weapon. All they had on these 4 men were 2 of their confessions, and now all 4 of them were facing the death penalty if convicted. A grand jury indicted Maurice, Robert, and Michael, but 2 grand juries failed to indict Forrest, and his charges were dropped in June of 2000. And eventually, after sitting behind bars for 3 years awaiting trial, Maurice Pierce's charges were also dropped due to a lack of evidence. Michael and Robert both immediately recanted their confessions and said that they only confessed because they were manipulated by the officers. And during each of their trials, the only evidence against them were their own confessions, but each other's confessions were also used against them and played in their trials. Both Robert and Michael refused to testify against the other. Robert Springsteen's trial began in spring of 2000. Experts testified that the tactics used in his interrogation led to his false confession. There were just a lot of setbacks in the trial for the defense. The defense was only allowed to mention 2 of the 50+ false confessions that the detectives got in this case. And they were not allowed to mention the fact that there was an active serial killer that targeted teenage girls in Austin, Texas around the time that these 4 teenage girls were murdered. Robert was found guilty and he was sentenced to death. Michael Scott's trial began in 2002 and it went pretty much the same way as Robert's. In both of their trials, the only evidence were the confessions. But the jury was shown photo after photo of these 4 girls and what their killer did to them. And while seeing these photos, a lot of the jury members were actually brought to tears. And then immediately after seeing these terrible photos, I couldn't even imagine what those photos looked like of these little girls. They were shown tapes of these men saying that they did it. They did it to those girls. So you really can't blame these average people for believing these men when they say that they did what they're saying they did. If these were false confessions, which I believe they were, you have to blame the tactics that were used in the interrogations that led to the false confessions. You can't blame the people on the jury. Michael Scott was found guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison. Immediately, both Michael and Robert began to appeal their convictions. And then 15 years after these murders, both Robert and Michael's convictions were overturned, stating that their constitutional rights were violated. Since each of their confessions were used against the other one, this violated their right to confront their accuser, so both men would be getting a new trial. But the issue was, the only evidence against them were these confessions. So hoping to get some stronger evidence, they turned back to DNA. This time they were armed with more sophisticated technology that didn't exist 2 decades earlier. DNA tests were done on vaginal swabs that were taken from each of the victims. And from the swab taken from the youngest victim, Amy, they found a male's partial DNA profile. But this kind of backfired for the prosecution, because this new DNA testing revealed that the DNA was not a match for Robert, it was not a match for Michael or any of the 4 boys. Initially, they were thinking that maybe this meant that there was a 5th boy involved. So they began DNA testing every known acquaintance and friend of each of these 4 boys. There were no matches. They had a deadline in which they could retry Michael and Robert, and now there was this huge question mark. Where did this DNA come from? Who did this DNA belong to? Hoping to find an explanation that wouldn't ruin their case, they hypothesized that maybe the DNA came from cross-contamination. They DNA tested every man in these girls' families. They DNA tested every one of their guy friends. They tested every male customer that they could find that went to the yogurt shop that day. They tested every firefighter, every police officer, the medical examiners, anyone that was at the crime scene, anyone that handled their bodies. And they never found a match for that DNA. So until they could find a match for the DNA, they could not retry Robert and Michael. Their cases were dismissed. They were released after a decade behind bars, but they were not officially exonerated, meaning at any point they could go on trial again. And this was so hard for these victims' families because they're never going to get their daughters back, but they thought at the very least that their child's killers were behind bars. This was also terrible for the community. No matter which way you look at it, this either meant that they were letting killers out of prison, letting killers walk free, or that these men were wrongfully convicted and the true killers had been walking free the entire time. No matter which way you sliced it, it was just bad. And then in 2017, they got a hit on that DNA. On a public DNA database that was used for population studies, they got a match for their DNA. The issue was that this DNA was anonymously submitted to this population study database by the FBI. This DNA came from a person who had been processed or taken into custody by federal authorities. And because the DNA at the crime scene was not a full profile, that means it could technically be a match for many different men from the same family tree. Genetic genealogy is pretty new when it comes to solving crimes, but it has solved some pretty major crimes. The Golden State Killer. There was the Baby Garnett case. We covered that on TikTok not that long ago. So even if this person that was arrested by the FBI and their DNA was put in this database wasn't the killer in the yogurt shop murder case, this could be a tool for the investigators to use. They could look at that person's family tree to see if they have a male relative that was living in Austin, Texas in the early 90s. This could be a place for the investigators to start. This was the strongest lead they had had in decades. But the FBI would not give the information of who this DNA belonged to the Austin Police Department because of privacy laws. In 2020, more DNA testing was done on their sample from the crime scene, and it came with good and bad news. The good news was that they got more of a complete profile. The bad news was the more complete profile wasn't a match from the DNA from the FBI. In 2010, during a routine traffic stop, Maurice Pierce was pulled over for running a stop sign, I believe. People that knew Maurice said after what happened to him and his friends, he struggled with PTSD and he did not trust law enforcement anymore. During this traffic stop, Maurice Pierce stabbed a police officer in the neck and then he was shot. The officer survived, and Maurice Pierce did not.
Give me something first, Nick. Lay down. Get him down. Let me get over here. Give him. Should be grabbing knives. He's trying my knife. Shot him in the stomach. Yeah.
From the date that I'm uploading this episode, it has been 33 years, 9 months, and 13 days that this case has gone unsolved. It has been such a long time without answers, but I truly do believe that every case is solvable, and this one is no different. DNA testing is getting better nearly every day, and sometimes witnesses are more willing to talk after some time has passed. There has been so many cases in the past handful of years, in the past decade or so, that have been solved after 30 plus years. We just covered one last week with Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. There's been cases in the last handful of years, the last decade, that have been solved after 40 years, 50 plus years. So I really do not think that this case is a lost cause. I really do think that this case could be solved in the next handful of years. And if you're here for what I think most likely happened, honestly, I'm pretty stumped. But if I had to say what I believe most likely happened, I think that the answer lies with those two men that were sitting in the booth. They were the last known customers in the yogurt shop. And I think that it's most likely that they were responsible. If you look at the crime scene photos, it appears that the girls were pretty far along in their closing of the shop. This was even confirmed by the manager of the shop. And there is one photo in particular that I find extremely interesting. You see a photo with a bunch of tables and booths, and each booth has chairs stacked up on top of it except for one. And that was the exact same booth where those two men were sitting 15 minutes before the yogurt shop locked their doors. It's possible that these men were casing the place to potentially rob them. Some people say that that does not make sense because a yogurt shop probably wouldn't have a lot of money. I'm really interested to hear all of your thoughts. There is no shortage of theories in this case, so let me know if you think I missed a big one. Let me know all your thoughts, theories, and opinions in the comments. My thoughts and all of my heart go out to the community, anyone affected by this case, and most importantly, the families of Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy. If you believe you have information on the yogurt shop murders, please visit the website austincrimestoppers.org or call 512-472-TIPS. That information will also be in the description below this episode. The answers are out there, and I believe that they will come to light someday, hopefully very soon. But sadly, as of right now, justice has not been served, and this case continues to be unsolved. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's investigation. Please make sure to come by again next week. We will be investigating 2 teenage boys that committed a brutal crime after being inspired by a very popular horror movie. And I'll see you guys next week when we are hot on the case once again.